Hello, you're very welcome back to another episode of Why the Long Face, a podcast with me, Horst O'Keefe. I hope you've all had a good week, lads. It's kind of been a fairly dreary, shitty old week, really, hasn't it? And it got me thinking about life. In particular, it kind of got me thinking about life in relation to these massive decisions that we either have to make or just like sometimes we feel that we have to make. Because it always feels like there's something going on, there's some big thing that we have to like make a decision on. And to be honest, it can get you really stressed, it can get you really down. And that's not what I want for people. So for the next half an hour, 40 minutes, whatever the fuck it is, I'm going to talk about some situations in my life that I experienced like this awful stress over, where I was trying to just figure out what do I do, what's the best decision. So I'm going to tell you about some of those situations in my life. Maybe you might kind of find something in common, maybe you won't, who fucking knows. And then I'm just going to talk about, I'm going to give you a bit of advice. Simply just from a man who has experienced some shit. That's all it is. Like I've said before, I don't have any qualifications to actually give out like mental health advice or anything. I'm just a man who's been through some stuff. So I'm hoping maybe by sharing what I've been through, that might help you. Who knows? Anyway, let's just fucking get on with the podcast. So, obviously, there's lots of different situations for lots of different people. Just because I go through something doesn't necessarily mean you'll go through it, or vice versa. I suppose for young people, one decision that we all kind of have to go through comes at the end of secondary school. And it's when we're trying to basically decide what do we want to do with the rest of our lives. That's, to be honest, it's pretty fucking stupid that at the age of 17 or 18 we have to then decide what we want to do with the rest of our lives. Like, I know myself, I'm still learning things about myself. I'm still like developing as a person and finding myself as a person. So the fact that I was supposed to like know what I wanted to do 5 or 6 years ago, that is quite stressful. I think I was relatively lucky because I had a fairly cemented idea of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work in film and work in TV. I knew I wanted to be in that industry. So I didn't really have as much stress about making that decision. So I applied for a college in Dublin to do basically film and TV production. So the way that course worked, or the way a lot of those courses work, is you have to do a portfolio first. So you get like a good chunk of your points for that, and then your leaving cert points bring up the rest of it. And unfortunately, I did shit in my portfolio, which at the time completely destroyed me. And then when I asked for feedback, I basically got told in a nicer way that I'm not good enough. So like at the age of 18, I thought I had a very cemented idea of what I wanted to do and what I was going doing, and then I was basically told I'm not good enough. And that completely destroyed me. Like, the points they gave me for my portfolio were so low that I would have basically had to get 625 points in the leaving cert to even be anywhere remotely near getting in. And for anyone who does know me, 625 points was never ever going to happen. That's just not me. So yeah, it completely broke me. And I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do like with my life. There was nothing else I wanted to do. I wanted to do film. I wanted to do TV. I wanted to be in that industry. There was nothing else out there for me as far as I was concerned. So I finished off the leaving cert anyway. I didn't really care by the end of it because I was just so kind of destroyed and so broken. I did it and I got a job, and I decided I would take a year out. Like, I didn't know what I was going to do over the year, but I decided to take a year out and just work and try and get my head together, try and figure out a new plan for myself, basically. And to be honest, I spent a good 6 months of that year like basically wallowing and just being like, fuck, life is shit and I'm not good at the one thing I thought I was good at. So I just kind of took a step back eventually, and I kind of practically started to think about, okay, what else can I do? What else am I good at? What else do I like doing? So I even looked at like the film work I had done, and nearly all of my films are somewhere to do with like mental health, or they have some sort of a message that might try and help people. So in my head I was like, oh, perfect, yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll just go into like an industry where I can actually help people. So I applied for a PLC course doing social studies. Now, PLC courses are great. I would highly recommend a PLC course to anyone, because they're only a year long, and they're a great way of finding out if the thing you're studying is actually something you like or not. Like, luckily they're not that expensive, so you can just basically trial it, see if it's something you like, as opposed to applying for a 4-year course, spending stupid money, and then realizing, oh, this actually isn't for me, which of course is fine. Like, you can have that realization, but if you're not sure, I would highly recommend maybe try out a PLC course. Now, when I did the PLC course, I was literally 2 or 3 weeks into it, and I was like, no, this isn't for me. This is not for me at all. Because I knew that this was like my second option. It wasn't what I was happy doing. And I'm going to come back to this, because basically I realized I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing this because I felt pressure from everyone else around me. Because when I was telling people, oh, I'm taking a year out, they weren't concerned as to like why I was taking the year out or what the year out was. It was always, oh, what are you doing after the year? What's your plans going forward? Not, what are your plans for you right now? So I basically felt forced, or I felt pushed into making a decision. So I just jumped at the first course that came at me. So that didn't help either. That really started to affect my mental health. And then I got a little lifeline. So the PLC course that I was doing, they basically had this deal or this thing set up with LIT, the college here in Limerick, where if you got like a certain amount of grades, you could use those to get into any course in LIT. It didn't matter how relevant it was to the PLC course you had done. So once I found that out, I started looking at the other courses that were available in LIT, and then I found the film and photography course in the art college. And I was like, yes, this is perfect. This is my way out. So I went down to the open day and I met with the tutors, and the tutor was honestly one of the best people I've ever met in my life, because he spoke to me about my work. I showed him some of my work. He could see how engaged I was with him and with the idea of being on this course, and he turned around to me and he said, yes, I 100% need someone like you on this course. So I was like, yeah, absolutely, like all of that sounds amazing. What do I have to do? And he turned around and he said, oh, it's grand, all you have to do is a portfolio. And when I tell you, I literally shit myself. Well, not literally, but like, I think I actually had to walk away from him. I just said, oh my god, right, thank you so much. And I walked away, because the last time I had done a portfolio, the portfolio I was told it was awful. And I hadn't done any work. I hadn't done any more work than what was already in the portfolio, because my confidence in my work was shot. So I just hadn't done anything. So I came home and I opened the portfolio for the first time in pretty much a year, if not longer. And I looked at everything, and I took everything that was there and I just expanded it as much as possible. I think it went from like a 20-page A4 portfolio to nearly 50 pages of this A1 sized portfolio, and I worked my fucking arse off. So when I handed in the portfolio to the art college and I got my points back, I think I got like 100 or like 50 points off the highest mark that you can get. So that already was such a confidence boost for me. This little story has basically been a long fucking way around just saying don't let other people factor into your decision making. Like, make the decision for you, because it's you that has to live it, it's you that has to do it. Now, unfortunately, I didn't take my own advice, or I didn't even necessarily make that connection at the time. So we'll fast forward. I got into first year of art college. First year of art college wasn't great for me, just because my granddad passed away. So that really took up like a whole chunk of my first year of college. But I passed and I got through, and I got into the specific side of like the film and the TV and like the photography and all of that stuff. So then I was like, right, this is perfect, this is my time to shine. And I started making like loads of work, and then pandemic hit. So I basically lost half of second year and pretty much all of third year. And throughout my entire college experience, I've realized that I was basically excusing a lot of stuff. I kept on saying, oh, first year was bad, I didn't really like it, but that was just because I was dealing with a lot. And then second year and third year, it just because it wasn't right because of the pandemic and I was working from home. And then it came to me going back for fourth year, and I was living in Limerick. I would walk past the college quite a lot, and every time I walked past, I got this horrible, like, sinking feeling of like, oh God, I have to go back there soon. And that's not a feeling you should have about going anywhere. That should be ringing like alarm bells in your head that, Jesus, something's not right. So I think it was close to a month before I had to go back. And I just sat here one night and I was thinking about, like, I have to do another year here now. And I just want to clarify that the course itself was not bad in any way, shape or form. I enjoyed the course, but what I found difficult personally about it was the whole thing was that you had to create work and you had to be creative. But you had to be creative within a certain time constraint. And this was where I would start arguing with my tutors, because creativity has to flow naturally. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to sit down today, I'm going to be creative, I'm going to have an idea. For me, ideas come at the most random time. It had gotten to a point where I was submitting work that I myself didn't even really care about. Because it was, shit, I have to do something, and I'd run out and I'd take photography, or I'd make a quick video and I'd throw it all together, and I'd have to come up with some reason as to why that basically fit into the theme. And that's not how I want to do any of my work. And then, unfortunately, the other side of it was I would have to argue with my tutors because they would tell me that my work wasn't arty enough. Now, to me, that doesn't make any sense because art is subjective, but I think what they were getting at was it just wasn't fine art. It was a lot more mainstream. And they were right, it is. I want my stuff to be a lot more accessible. The best example I can give is I did a photo shoot, and the premise was around like depression and the origins of depression, or where they thought depression came from, or what depression was, like years and years and years ago. So kind of one of the first things or times it was like documented was in Roman times, and the Romans believed that all of your emotions were controlled by these 4 liquids called humors that like flowed around your body. So depending on what emotion you were feeling, that was basically down to what liquid or what humor was in control that day. And the one that they said was responsible for depression was called the black bile, or they didn't really call it depression, they referred to it as melancholia. So basically, if you were depressed or you were sad, that was basically just down to the fact that you had this black bile basically flowing around your body. So what I did was I went out to like a forest and I did this photo shoot where I basically covered myself in black bile or black goo. And to me, that was a lot more kind of artistic or arty than anything I had done before. But I went in and I showed them to my tutors, And one tutor turned around and said, yeah, like, they're interesting, but I think they'd be more interesting if you were holding a rabbit or a hare. Now, just think about that for just a second. So think about, like, the story that I just told you of, like, the origins of depression. Now tell me, what the fuck does a rabbit have to do with that? Now, obviously I didn't say that to her. I was a lot nicer. I was like, yeah, okay, but... And I asked why. I genuinely asked, why a rabbit? Or a hare? Like, why? And the response was, because when I look at these pictures at the moment, like, I get that they're about depression. I know they're about depression. But if you were holding a rabbit, that would make me question it. Like, what? Genuinely, what? That absolutely makes no sense. So that was definitely an eye-opener, where I was constantly having to defend my work. Because I didn't make my work for it to be artistic. I didn't make my work for it to be arty and be in art galleries. I make my work so I can try and help people understand depression, or just, like, destigmatize depression, to have someone actually talking about it. And they just didn't get that. And that's perfectly fine, because I understand that they have criteria, and that most of my tutors are in fact artists themselves. So I'm sure there was logic, and it was constantly me battling with them and them battling with me. And I didn't want to go back into my fourth year knowing, like, what my strengths are. Like, in my video work, it's me talking about depression and mental health and all of that. And I knew I was going to have to argue with them on a daily basis, because obviously fourth year, it's one big long project. And I just knew myself that I couldn't do it. So I didn't go back. I decided to drop out. And I won't lie, like, it was a very hard decision for me to make, because I think when you tell someone, like, you dropped out of college or you left college, people are like, oh, because you're lazy, or because you were failing and you were flunking and you were out drinking all the time and you weren't actually doing the work. And, like, I spent many nights here just writing out, like, the pros and cons of going to college or sticking out the year and all of that. And I remember I came back one evening and I sat down to look at the list again. The top reason that I had for not going back was because I don't like it. Coming back and reading that again, that hit me really hard, because I was like, I had maybe 3 or 4 other reasons under that, but there shouldn't have had to been. The fact that I didn't like it, the fact that it wasn't for me, like, that should have been the only reason, and it is the only reason. So, like I said, I decided to leave. And it was the best thing that I ever did, because it has given me so much more time to actually do the work I want to do. Like, I have this now, I have this podcast. I would not be doing this if I was still in college, if I hadn't left college. Like, I have sold and made photo books. Like, I wouldn't have done that if I was still in college. I wouldn't have had time, or I wouldn't have even had, like, the motivation to do it. Whereas now, every bit of work that I do, I'm doing it for me. I can do it at my own pace. Funnily enough, I actually feel like I am more creative, because I'm creating for me. So I have more ideas coming in. I don't have these constraints to try and fit any of my work into. It's just fucking great. It is pretty amazing that I can just do work when I want, whatever way I want. So the point of all of this, a lot of my decision, or a lot of me not making that decision rather, was based on what everyone else will think. And that was including my friends and my family. Not even like just the wider, I didn't really care about the tutors. Like, they had other students and that was fine. But it was like, well, my friends feel like I'm abandoning them. Because, like, not all of college was bad at all. Like, I made an amazing group of friends, and I still have an amazing group of friends through college. Like, I had great experiences. It was just, it wasn't for me. So I think if you do have a big decision to make, the first thing that you have to think about is yourself. And I 100% know that is easier said than done. I've just told you about 2, if not 3 different times where I was thinking about everyone else rather than myself. So I know that it's hard, but you do have to just try, because it's your life, you're the one living it, you're the one that has to live with the consequences of that decision every day. So I just want to tell you a quote. Say a quote for you? Tell you a quote? Is that a thing? Fuck it, doesn't matter. I'm going to say words and you're going to listen, okay? So I came across this quote only a couple of weeks ago, and it has really stuck with me. It's from a book called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. So I think half the reason why it sticks is because there's a part in the book where it's just the boy and the horse, and they're walking through a forest, and it's like really dark, and the boy gets scared. So the boy turns to the horse and says, "Look, I'm scared. I have no idea where I'm going. I have no idea what I'm doing." And the horse looks to the boy and he says, "Can you see your next step?" And the boy says, "Yeah, I can." And the horse says, "Well, then that's all that matters." And I think that is extremely powerful, because again, when we're making like these decisions, or we're trying to decide what we're doing in a situation or in life, we always think about the big picture, and I think we end up blowing it out because we think that we have to have an answer to like the end goal or the end outcome, and we don't. Because if you try and control the entire situation, you're going to blow it out of proportion, and you'll basically end up talking yourself out of it, because you'll be like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know how this ends or how this will end up. All you have to figure out is your next step. Literally, what are you doing next? Because once you have that figured out, then you just do the next step, and the next step, and the next step. And again, I know it seems simple, but that's the point. If you break it down and you make it as simple as possible and put it in its like simplest form, it's just going to help you understand a lot more. It's going to help you contextualize what's going on, and it might help you eventually see the light, or see your way out, or possibly see your future. Just to change it up slightly now, we're going to break things up, and we're going to have my movie of the week. So my movie of the week this week is called Mass. I had never heard of the director before, but I saw a clip of it and I was just instantly kind of intrigued. So basically it's pretty much just 4 actors for the entire thing. Like, other actors kind of pop in at the start and at the end to kind of give you context, but the primary part of this entire film is just these 2 couples, and they're sitting down to have a conversation because one of the couple's sons killed the other couple's son. So it's pretty much just this really heavy dialogue piece, but it's fucking amazing. Like, halfway through I kind of became self-aware of, oh my god, I'm actually still watching a movie. Like, I got so drawn in, it genuinely felt like I was just a mediator in this conversation. It was so raw and it was so emotional. Like, I cried. I'm not ashamed to say I cried. But it was really interesting because you got to see like the emotions of both sides of this story. And as someone who experienced grief in quite a strong way, a lot of it resonated with me, because especially with like a sudden death, you have so many questions. And even when the actors weren't speaking, or they weren't talking about their children or about the situation, you could still feel their pain and that anguish and that longing for answers that unfortunately you just can't get. So I would say, if you're not ready to like sit down and watch a really heavy film, I wouldn't watch this one. But if you're like in a space where you want to watch something really emotional and something that's going to resonate with you really hard, watch this film, Mass. It is honestly unbelievable. And I think it's one of those films that really flew under the radar. Like, I hadn't heard of it. It came out last year. Like, you'd recognize some of the actors, but they're not these big name actors. And I think that adds to it too, because you're not watching it being like, oh, I know that guy from this, or I know that woman from this. It's not about that. You're completely, oh my god, these people went through something awful, and you're literally going through that with them. Again, it could just be because I went through something similar that the emotions resonated with me so much. But I think even as an outsider, you can't help but be drawn into the emotion of this piece. So if you can come across the film Mass anywhere, I would highly recommend that you watch it. So I gave some examples earlier of situations that I was in, but I want to try and give some advice now that you can kind of attribute to any situation, or hopefully you can attribute to any situation. So firstly, the very first piece of advice I would give you: when a situation arises and a decision has to be made, do not make that decision straight away. Because when you're confronted with a situation, you pretty much go into like a fight or flight situation, and you will automatically make a decision straight away. Now that decision might be the best decision, and it might be the decision that you stay with or stick with. But we are very emotional creatures, and sometimes we react in the way that we probably shouldn't, or maybe necessarily didn't want to react. So if you have a situation that arises, firstly, try and remain neutral if at all possible, or at least if you do make a decision to yourself, keep that to yourself until you have the time to actually sit down and deal with it. Because I've heard a lot of people, and I know a lot of people, and I've done it myself, who say, I'm not going to think about it, it'll sort itself out. I can assure you it won't. Putting it off does absolutely nothing other than keeping it in your head, and it's just going to stay there, and if anything, it'll manifest into something a lot bigger and a lot worse for yourself. So just take your time to begin with. Then, when you do feel ready to tackle the situation or think about the situation, sit down. Make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Just take 5 or 10 minutes completely to yourself, no one else around you, and think about the situation. What I do, what really works for me, I write it all out. I write out everything that happened, and then I literally do a pros and cons list. And I know it sounds stupid. It's probably something you've been told by like your parents or by a counselor or something years ago. They're like, oh, just write it all out, pros and cons. And it feels like a chore, but I promise you it does help, because writing it out is just a way of getting it all out of your head, and it's there in front of you, and you're not trying to look at like this crazy mind map in your head. It's literally physically there in front of you. So that alone will also help you kind of put context to the situation and see where you're going, see what the pros are, see what the cons are. Now, the situation then it's entirely up to yourselves. You can keep it to yourself, or you can talk to someone. I personally like to kind of keep it to myself, for the simple reason that sometimes it can be very hard to explain your side of things, and unfortunately some people don't necessarily have your best interest at heart, or they may not be just able to comprehend the situation from your perspective. And that's not out of badness to anyone. Like, you could go and talk to your friend or your parents or a counselor or anyone like that, but the only person that fully knows the situation the best is you. So by all means, talk to someone. I'm not saying to like stay quiet about it, but I would be very careful in talking to people specifically about your decision, because that's something that's only going to affect you. in the long run. So by all means, like I said, talk to people. Don't keep it all inside, because obviously you'll drive yourself fucking demented. But make sure when you're making your decision that it's for you. And that's leading right into my last point. Make sure that when you're making that decision, you are not doing it for anybody else other than yourself. Because it's your life. You need to focus on you first. You need to put you first in every situation. And that is, I think it's definitely an Irish thing, where we're like, oh Jesus, if I'm doing all this stuff for me, if I'm putting myself first, people will think I'm selfish. And the word selfish really annoys me, because it's got all this kind of negative connotation, and it's seen as this really, really bad thing. And being selfish doesn't have to be. Selfish isn't just like constantly doing things for you and only caring about yourself, or only thinking about yourself. Like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So you have to try and learn to like flip the script in your head on what being selfish means. Because it's not always a bad thing. Yeah, of course, like there is people out there who are extremely selfish and only do things for themselves. But just because you start putting yourself first in a situation, that does not make you selfish. That just means that you're starting to understand your worth, and that you're starting to focus on yourself. When you're making a decision or you're in a situation, 100%, yeah, you'll have friends around you, you'll have your work colleagues around you, you'll have your family around you. But just because they're here today does not mean they'll be there tomorrow. Like, do not let other people factor into your decisions, because yes, they'll support you and yes, they'll be there, but ultimately they're not the ones that are being affected by it. You are. Like, this could be genuinely down to absolutely anything. It could be down to like applying for a job or leaving a job. It could be down to going on a date or not going on a date, or like breaking up with someone or getting with someone, or anything like that. You have to try and start putting yourself first. And I know that it's easy for me to sit here and say this. I know that the practical side of actually implementing it in your life is a lot harder. And it's scary, because unfortunately, no matter what decision you actually make, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You don't know if it's going to be positive or negative. But either way, if you make the decision and you do it for you, in a way, that is still something that's kind of positive, because you've started that journey of self-discovery. You've started finding yourself, like I said, knowing your worth, knowing who you are, and knowing what you deserve. I do think that people are starting to kind of get to a point where they are kind of learning what they're worth and learning what they deserve. Like, I've worked a good few jobs in my lifetime. Not all of them have been good. And I can stand here now firmly on my own 2 feet and say I will never ever work a job where I'll be treated badly. Ever. I don't care if I'm high up in the company or if I'm like baseline. If I'm being treated badly, I leave. I don't care. You can find another job. Because I know my worth. I know what I deserve. And again, like it is not easy in any way to start putting yourself first. Making that first decision is going to be the hardest one that you do, but I promise you, if you start doing it, the other decisions will be a lot easier. I have had a lot of situations, even recently, where I've had to try and make decisions, and they've been hard, they've been awful, but they have been easier because I've started to learn how to put myself first. And unfortunately, the outcomes haven't even always been what I wanted them to be, but in the long run, I know it's what's best for me. Like another prime example, I know I'm only giving examples about my life, but I can't really give examples about anyone else's life because I haven't lived anyone else's life. I was working as a supervisor, and I loved the company and I loved the job, but it was just a lot. There was a lot of outside stuff that was affecting the job. There was a lot of like hierarchy nonsense that happens in any kind of company, I suppose. And it wasn't for me. I wasn't happy. I was coming home in the evenings and I couldn't shut off. And it got to the point where I had to take time out of work for my mental health. And so now I have gone back, but I have asked to be demoted. So I'm back down to just a sales assistant, and I am so much happier now. And that wasn't an easy decision to make, because again, I was focused on, I'm letting the company down, I'm letting my colleagues down, they're going to be in a rough situation now because they'll be left without a supervisor. But I managed to kind of stop myself from that kind of whole overthinking situation. I stripped it back, I sat down, I wrote out my list, and I realized that if I want to keep going forward, I can't, like, that was no way to maintain a life, like me coming home not doing anything else because I didn't have time, because I was too busy worried about the job, even when I wasn't there. One of the best things that I did for myself was I got a little whiteboard from my room and I wrote loads of shite on it, like loads of stuff. Some of it is just quotes, like the quote I said earlier about the boy and the horse. Some of it is questions that if I am starting to stress about a situation or a decision, I just look at them. So I'm gonna throw out a few of them. Again, they may not necessarily work for you. This is just what I use to kind of help me get through things. They're questions that make sense to me. So the first one is it big picture or little picture? Or is it going to be a major scene? So that goes back to kind of what I was saying in the podcast a few weeks ago. I view my life as if it's a movie, meaning whatever situation I'm in, I look at it as, is that going to be a major plot point in the movie? And if it's not, that already kind of de-escalates how important it actually is. Therefore, like, is it big picture or little picture? Like, does it actually matter? Not does it matter, like, is it worth a load of stress, or is it something that can simply be sorted just by sitting down and having a quick think about it? The other one that I kind of use the most, or that is definitely, it's a good way of looking at it and it's a good practice to get into, is don't focus on, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Or is the way you're thinking about it good or bad? That doesn't matter. Focus on, is it helpful? Like, is the way you're treating the situation or thinking about the situation, is that actually beneficial to you? Or are you currently just in a state of like tearing it all apart and stressing out over it? If you're in that situation, maybe it's not the best time to be thinking practically about the answer. Maybe you need to take a step back and reevaluate the situation and then see, are you being a little bit more helpful to yourself about it? Again, because when a situation arises, that's normally when your emotions are at their highest and you don't necessarily think clearly. So is it helpful is a lot more beneficial than is it a good thought or is it a bad thought? See, because that's something that like arises a lot as well. There's a lot of pressure with making decisions, and to be honest, a lot of that pressure probably comes from ourselves. There might be outside pressure depending on what the situation is, but it is perfectly okay to tell someone, I'm not ready to have this conversation, I'm not ready to make this decision yet, I am not emotionally ready to deal with this yet. Because if you try and tackle a situation when you're not emotionally ready to, you're not going to get the outcome you want, or you're not going to get the outcome that's best for you. Like, especially with some of the situations I've been going through even recently with my job and with other things. I had so much going on in my head, and I had all these people coming to me for answers. And I actually put it this way to my counsellor recently, where it felt like if my brain was a computer desktop, like my brain was like the first thing you see when you open up your computer. I just had like shit everywhere. There was icons all over the place, and I didn't know where to start. There was just things popping up left, right and centre, and I would sit down and I would just get so overwhelmed by everything. So before I made any decisions, or before I started actively working on making any decisions, I spent the time on myself. So it's basically like I have put everything into folders. So like, okay, there's this situation, like situation 1, and I put everything related to that in there. And then there's the other situation, and then there's like me trying to build my business. There's like all these little folders, and so everything is kind of cleaned up now. So when I go in now and I look at my desktop in my head, none of the decisions are gone, like none of the situations are gone, but it's just a lot more cleared up. And I now have the power to decide when I want to look at whatever situation. Like when I have a bit of time to myself, I can sit down and I can tackle situation 1 or situation 2 at my own pace, because I have now made it a lot more accessible to myself. So I hope some of what I've said has made sense. I hope some of what I've said has helped. Like, Rome wasn't built in a day, lads. You're not going to sort yourselves in a day. You're not going to sort any situation without working on it, without working on yourself, and without just like practically thinking about it. Like, I've really enjoyed this podcast. I've really enjoyed all the podcasts, but I've really enjoyed this one because I'm starting to get a little bit more confident in talking about things, like my own experiences, and then kind of relaying them onto you. It's not a case of, oh God, look at me, I've been through so much shit. It is not that at all. It's that I have gone through these things, and I'm willing to share, and I'm willing to try and help ye maybe understand, or help ye tackle them in a different way. Because all I want is for people to be content and to be just happy in your like day-to-day lives, because no one needs stress. The world is gone fucking crazy at the moment, and you can't control anything other than yourself. So for the next week, just think about yourselves. Think, are you being nice to yourself? And think, are you doing what's best for you, or are you doing what you think others want you to do? Keep the head up, lads. Mind yourselves.